apartmentfinder.com. Apartments near me. Low rent, yes. $1,350? You gotta be kidding me. Hey, listen, looking for an apartment to rent, hey, that can be a daunting task. You obviously want to live in a place with nice amenities, pleasant environment, hopefully close to your job. But, these days when rental rates are increasing higher than wages, that's nearly impossible. How much should you pay in rent? Let's talk about it. All right, so you may have heard of the 30% rule. The 30% rule, simply put, you calculate 30% of your gross monthly salary. That's what you allocate towards rent. For example, if your gross monthly salary is $3,000 a month, then $900 would be the top rent that you could afford. So where did this 30% rule come from? It actually came from the government. In order to determine who qualified for public housing programs, households that spent more than 30% for housing were said to be cost burden. Now, many critics say that the 30% rule does not take into account variations in household spending and cannot be relied on solely. For example, let's say you're single, you have no dependents, then your cost of living should be lower, and thus that could allow you to afford more in rent. But with families, they might choose to pay more in rent if that meant that they could get their children in a more desirable school district. Now, another model to follow is what we call the 50-30-20 budget. With this model, you would allocate 50% of your income towards housing, transportation, groceries, utilities, and all the other essential bills that come out each and every month. 30% of your income would be allocated towards entertainment. So, for example, movies, or maybe you got your eyes on the new sneakers coming out. You want to get those. So that's 30% towards entertainment. 20% of your budget would be allocated towards retirement and paying off debt. So with this model, if you're allocating 50% towards housing, transportation, groceries, and whatnot, if you figured out that, hey, maybe your transportation is not costing as much as normal, maybe your car is paid off, you don't travel as much, you don't have a lot of gasoline expense or what have you, you could possibly afford more towards rent. Most apartment complexes that you rent from still will require proof that you have an annual income that's at least 40 times the monthly rent. It really equals that 30% rule that we talked about. Also, keep in mind that you're going to have some upfront costs like deposits, fees, charges, moving expenses. If you have a pet, there's a pet fee. You might have to pay an extra monthly fee on top of that if you have a pet. So if you're in love with a particular place and you don't meet these requirements, consider getting a roommate. Or you might ask a friend or a family member to be a guarantor on that monthly lease. Just make sure they know what commitments they have facing them. So there you have it. The 30% rule is the kind of rule of thumb. Also look at that 50-30-20 because, again, if you're single on your own, 50% of your housing, transportation, groceries, you might can get that down and you could afford more in monthly rent than you thought you could. Hope it helps. We'll see you next time.